Your podcast is a powerful tool that serves your audience and your business. But how do you manage it all, bring in new listeners, and convert those listeners into customers? That's what this show is all about. Welcome to Podcasting for Educators. I'm Sarah Whitaker, classroom teacher turned podcast manager, and I'm here to help you get the most out of your show, all while making an impact on other educators. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Podcasting for Educators. This week, we are celebrating International Podcast Day. Technically, the official day is this Saturday, September 30th, so we're a little bit early, but I think we need at least a week to dedicate to this holiday. International Podcasting Day is an international celebration of the power of podcasts, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. But first, I want to share just some quick recent stats that just came out. Not going to go too much into them because we would be here all day, but I will link this research in the show notes. This is called the Podcasting Today Client Report Audience Insights from Nielsen and Edison Research. And this comes out every year. And I went through it, and I think that some of the information is just really cool. And I wanted to share it with you, especially considering what we're celebrating today. So here are just a few little tidbits pulled out of this report that I thought you might be interested in too. Number one being that the number of Americans listening to podcasts has increased by 45% in the last 5 years alone. And weekly U.S. podcast listeners average 9 podcasts in the last week. I have to go back and double check the research from last year. I want to say last year that number was either 7 or 8 podcasts a week. So these stats are telling us that listenership is just continuing to rise. Among listeners ages 18 through 34, heavy podcast listening time, which they define as 10 plus hours, has increased by 2/3 in the past year. And that's 10 plus hours a week. This next thing I thought was pretty interesting just because of what we've been through with COVID and all of that in the last few years and so many people working from home. But we are finally seeing a jump in listening in the car or in public transportation again. This used to be a really big way that people, or a really big place that people were listening to podcasts, and then that kind of went down when COVID started because so many people are now at home all the time. But it seems like, people are going back to work now. They're going back to offices and things like that. And so now there has been a noticeable jump of people listening in some form of transportation again. In fact, it's now the most popular location to listen to podcasts among consumers 18 to 34 and 35 to 49. So not only is this an interesting stat just to kind of see that change, but it's also really great information for us to remember as podcasters because of how much time people have to consume episodes. So I believe the statistic is that the average commute is around like 22 minutes. So you really want to consider that when you are creating your episodes and thinking about how long you want your episodes to be. Okay, I've got one more little tidbit to share that I thought was particularly interesting for you if you are an educational podcaster. So when you create a podcast, you put yourself in a main genre or main category. And right now, the most popular podcast genres are comedy, news, and society and culture. Those are the top 3. And then number 4 is true crime. And then number 5 is education. So looking specifically at the education podcast genre, in May of 2019, there were an estimated 11,677,727 listeners of podcasts in the education genre. Now, in 2023, it's gone up to 19,281,312 listeners of the education genre. So from over 11 million to over 19 million, which is a 65% increase of people who are listening to the education genre, which I just think is so cool because I know that many of you who are featured in today's episode and who are listening to this right now, you are part of that huge jump in the education genre of people listening to the educational podcasts. But no matter what genre you're listed in, one thing is for sure, You are all making a big, big difference with your podcast, and it's time to celebrate that. I put out a call for you all to contribute to today's episode, and you delivered big time. I cannot wait for you to listen to the rest of this episode. I asked you to send in voice messages telling us who you are, what your podcast is. And then I asked you to share something that you are celebrating about your podcast. It could be a small win, it could be a big win. I think that we don't celebrate our wins nearly enough, especially with our podcast, because a lot of times we feel like it's just us. If you're a solo podcaster, you are sitting there by yourself recording. And so often we don't celebrate these things, whether they're big or small. And so I really wanted to give you the opportunity to do that today. And then I asked you to share a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who might be considering a podcast, but they haven't yet taken that plunge. I listened to each and every one of these clips with a huge smile on my face because I am just amazed at all of you. I'm amazed that you keep up with your shows. You have pushed past imposter syndrome that may have happened at the beginning that I know a lot of you faced. You are doing big things and you are willing to share these things with us today. So truly, thank you for that. Not that you need me to tell you that I'm proud of you, but I really am. And I hope that you're proud of yourself. Listening to all of you talk about your podcasts, it's just amazing to think of how many people you're impacting with your shows. So listen in if you are considering starting a podcast. Maybe this will give you that push and that motivation that you've been looking for. And if you're a current podcaster, listen in to celebrate other podcasters in this space, and maybe you'll even find some potential guests for your show. All right, I am going to go ahead and play all of these messages, and then I will see you at the end of the episode.
Hi there, my name is Kirsten Hammond. I'm the host of the Creative Teacher Podcast for Teacher Sellers. I launched this in August of 2021, and I'm also the host of the Social Studies Teacher Podcast, which was launched in June of 2023. I've enjoyed podcasts so much, recording the episodes, editing it, and having guests on talking about what they know. And it's just been so rewarding sharing tips and advice for educators and teacher sellers. So if I were to go back, I would do like all of it again, just because it's just been so much fun. One thing I will say is that at the beginning, it feels like nobody's listening and it seems like it's really slow. You might have not a lot of downloads or maybe not as much listening audiences as expected, but let me tell you, it definitely picks up and you hear more and more of people who listen to it and you get messages from others. So it's fun hearing from the people who have listened and tuned in. So I will say my Creative Teacher Podcast is over 20,000 downloads right now. I have to look at the exact one, but it's just kind of fun with the Social Studies Teacher Podcast, just launching this. It's kind of at the very beginning stages. So I'm excited for the journey and how much it'll grow because I know it will. So just my advice is to keep on with it. It will definitely pick up.
Hi, I am Dana Rodebush from the Upper Elementary Simplified podcast, and I'm celebrating the fact that I started my podcast at the beginning of the summer season, and over the summer, I was able to push out over 20 episodes and gain some really loyal listeners along the way. My advice for anyone thinking about starting a podcast is just do it. It's so much fun, and you will love it.
Hi, my name is Sarah Stife, and with my podcasting partner, Alicia Dreyer, we have the Lit Think podcast, where we look at pop culture through the lens of the English classroom. We just celebrated our 50th episode, and we are also getting ready to present at NCTE in Columbus, Ohio in November. One piece of advice that I would have for people who are getting ready to start podcasting is pick something that you truly love to talk about and that you know a lot about, and be willing to learn the ins and outs of the tech world and also just getting to know your audience. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Mona of Honest Math Chat podcast, where I help K-8 teachers teaching math in ways that empower students to love and understand math. Gone are the days of hating math and hating math teaching, because we're just honestly breaking it down on Honest Math Chat. And one thing I'm so proud of is all the messages that I'm getting from teachers lately about how they're using the strategies that are shared on the podcast and it's working in their classroom. Like, that makes it all worth it. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I think my one tip is give yourself grace to not be perfect and just jump in and try it and learn as you go and add on things as you go. And if you give yourself grace, like, you can really start to make an impact on our teacher friends, like, right now. And that's what it's all about, is supporting each other.
My name is Danita Jacobs, and I host the official Triathlete podcast. Something I am proud of is simply launching my show and producing more than 40 episodes. It took me nearly a year to gain the courage to start my podcast. My advice for someone who is thinking about podcasting is to just get started. Like anything, it takes action and practice to improve. So take action and launch it.
Hey there, my name is Rachel Davis, and my podcast is School Counseling Simplified. Something that I am proud of and I am celebrating is that I recently hit 300,000 downloads. That feels so incredible that I get to be in the ears of so many awesome school counselors. And thanks, of course, to Sarah for helping me with my podcast. One piece of advice for someone who's thinking about podcasting, but maybe you're nervous to get started, is just do it. You can always tweak it and change it and make it better along the way. So grab your mic and get started.
Hey y'all, I'm Kristen Doyle and I host the Savvy Teacher Seller podcast, where I help TPT sellers grow your business in a sustainable way that won't burn you out. My podcast has been live a little over a year now, and the thing I am most proud of is that I have shown up consistently with a new episode every single week. If you're thinking about starting a podcast and you're a little nervous about it, my advice is to go ahead and plan out some episode topics ahead of time. Having my episode topics planned out is one of the biggest reasons I've been able to stay consistent and get them published every single week.
Hello, I'm Marcy Nicole, the host of the Inspiring ECE podcast. And one of the greatest things about my podcast is connecting with educators around the world, building a fantastic community where we support and encourage one another to continue in the field that we love and hold so dear.
Hello, my name is David Harris, and I am the host of the Teachers Forum. It's a new podcast that will launch on September 4th. One of the things that I'm most proud of and celebrating is that we're going to be a podcast that's going to amplify the voices of K through 12 educators, who I think oftentimes are overlooked in the conversations around education that are going on right now. So proud to be able to offer that forum for educators, and also very proud of the fact that during the time, I'll sit down with former students. So I plan on occasion to talk to former students and the things that they're doing right now, which is something I don't think exists in the podcast world right now. One piece of advice I would give: trust the process. There's so much good advice out there when you're doing something. If you trust the process and how it's laid out, it will work out for you. So that would be my advice. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Anna Marie Kretzy from Kretzy Creations, and I am the host of the podcast Elementary Math Chat. I launched my podcast on August 1st of this year, so I am still in the beginning phases, but it has already been such a fun and rewarding experience. What makes me the most proud is when I hear from teachers who are enjoying the podcast and who have implemented some of the ideas I've suggested. That is the reason I started this podcast, so it is a great feeling to hear feedback like this. If you are thinking about starting a podcast but are nervous about getting started, the best thing you can do is to plan out as many episode topics as you can. Being prepared with ideas will give you the confidence to take that first step. Good luck!
Hey there, teacher friend. This is Kristen Masick, the host of the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the show that delivers strategies for multiple prep middle school and high school teachers about how to manage time, plan, and thrive as a secondary teacher. What I am most proud of when it comes to my podcast is my consistency. It's something that I'm celebrating going on to 3 years and being able to post an episode every single week. And I did that differently. Sometimes I batched, sometimes I record the night before, but I have been consistent. If you are thinking about becoming a podcaster, I would join any of Sarah's groups, whether they're paid or free. They are the most amazing groups filled with the most amazing educator podcasters who are just willing to help one another. Hope to see you there.
Hi, my name is Lauren Tingle, and I am the host of the podcast called High School Counseling Conversations, where I support, obviously, high school counselors. Something that I'm proud of is that this summer I was sick and pregnant and not talking about my podcast a lot. So I was encouraged to see my downloads go up over the summer and to surpass 60,000 downloads. I was also encouraged that people were just listening more over the summer. So they were going back and listening to past episodes. And it really encouraged me not to take time off during the summer when I thought maybe I'm going to have to do that. Some pieces of advice for someone who is thinking about podcasting or getting into podcasting: do it, because it will make you an expert in your field. I've seen the know, like, and trust factor for people who have just found me skyrocket much faster when they listen to a podcast and feel like we're friends. It's so much easier to send somebody a link to a podcast episode when they ask me a question in my DMs. And instead of just reading a blog post, which I could send them that too, they get to hear my voice and hear the sentiment and the meaning behind what I'm saying. And I just think that that pays off in terms of selling resources and having them join my membership and just continuing to follow what I'm doing with my business, Counselor Click. So I'd encourage you to jump on that podcasting train and start your podcast today.
Hi, I'm Susan with the Share Teaching Podcast. I have a podcast for elementary teachers looking to create better systems in their classroom and become better writing instructors for their students. I am very proud of this podcast that I started during COVID of 2020. I can't believe it's been that long already. Time has flown. If you're on the fence thinking about starting a podcast, just do it. It is a lot of trial and error at first, but eventually you find your feet and you just go with it. And I can't imagine a better platform to get my voice out there, get my thoughts heard, and really connect with my audience in a new way. I am very excited to come up on 10,000 downloads. That is such an amazing number to me that I've reached that many people listening to my content. So don't wait another day. Get started with that podcast if you're thinking about it. Happy International Podcast Day.
Hi, my name is Megan Polk, and I am the host of the Literacy Dive podcast. Something that I'm truly proud of is that I've considered my audience for every single episode that I've put out. Whether it is from self-care reminders to actionable teaching ideas, each one has been a result of something that I've been asked in my DMs. So what I've done with my podcast is actually built this library of longer responses than something that I would have just given back to someone who wrote me a message through an email or DM. This has turned into a treasure trove for new listeners, and I'm so grateful for such an engaged audience who has helped me consider each of my episode topics. One piece of advice that I would have to anyone who's thinking about starting a podcast is to just get started and to be original. Do what feels natural to connect with others. I always think outside the box and do things that are not a part of the norm, but what work for me, and I have found great success with that. So don't let someone else's methods or rhythm keep you from playing in the band.
Hey there, I'm Lorraine Padilla, host of the Apple Blossom Teachers podcast, where upper elementary teachers continue to bloom with weekly pedagogy and pep talks. I'm really proud of my persistence. While I didn't start out as the most consistent, I'm proud that I haven't given up and I've continued to work at finding systems for successfully podcasting with little ones at home because I know my message is important. One piece of advice is to collect a file or note on your phone with kind words or words of appreciation you've received about your podcast. These little messages or conversations really make a difference in pushing through when you feel like you're not sure anyone is listening because speaking to your laptop screen is not the most personal. And on that note, another piece of advice is to imagine your teacher bestie across from you as you record. It makes your voice so much more relaxed and conversational, and I can totally hear a difference in the episode energy when I do this.
My name is Rebecca Joyner, and I am the high school science teacher turned curriculum writer behind the company It's Not Rocket Science and the podcast Secondary Science Simplified. I also now have a second podcast I do just for fun called Bestie Business Banter, and I do it with my real life bestie, Lauren Tingle of Counselor Click. I am proud of the way that my podcast has allowed me to serve secondary science teachers in a way that no one else is really doing right now. I'm also really proud of Lauren and mine's Just for Fun podcast because it started as a dream of ours just to be able to interview some of our favorite mom business owners. And the dream has actually come to fruition. And we've nailed 2 of our dream guests within our first 12 episodes. My number one advice if you are nervous to get started is just to sit down and plan out your ideas for an entire quarter. I think a lot of people are scared to start because they're afraid they'll run out of things to say. And I bet if you sat down, you would be shocked how quickly the ideas will come. After that, I really recommend committing to doing this for 1 year. 2 of my podcasting friends convinced me to start my podcast by just making this a 1-year experiment instead of thinking of it as a lifetime commitment. It took the pressure off and it really got me going. Now I'm nearly 100 episodes in and have absolutely no intention of stopping anytime soon.
Hey there, my name is Stacia Archer Clark, a full-time teacher and CEO of Teacherpreneur from the beautiful Caribbean island of Barbados. I am also the host of 2 amazing teacher podcasts, the Lesson Plans for Kinder podcast, where I help pre-K and kinder teachers get colorful and creative with their lesson plan ideas, and the Simplify to Manage podcast, where I help full-time teachers in the classroom with their teacher businesses to find simple steps, simple systems, and simple strategies to help them manage while being a teacherpreneur. I'm super proud that I was able to push past all the limiting beliefs of creating and launching a podcast. It took me a long time to do so, almost about 2 years, but now that I've finally done it, I think it was the best decision I made for my business.
Hi, this is Melissa from the Annotated ELA podcast, and I am so excited because I am celebrating 20 episodes. I started this podcast not sure if I could keep up, but thanks to Sarah Whitaker from Podcasting for Educators, I have gone 20 straight weeks with an episode every week. My one piece of advice if you're starting a podcast is to have a plan and stick to it. And if you can't stick to that plan, then adjust it so it works, but just keep going. And listen to everything that Sarah says. Her advice is invaluable.
How awesome was it hearing from all of those podcasters? I loved hearing all of your wins about your downloads and your consistency, and hearing from listeners about how they've applied advice from your podcast. How cool is that to see? That's just the best feeling. And you all gave amazing advice to people who might be listening who are considering starting a podcast. I hope that you feel inspired and motivated if that is you. I think a very popular piece of advice was to jump in. You have to pull that Band-Aid off at some point. I've said this on the show so many times, but whenever I start working with somebody, so many times they've said, yeah, I've sat on this idea for 2 years, 3 years, and I just haven't gotten the confidence to jump in. And you heard those numbers that I shared in the very beginning. Listenership rises every single day. There is more than enough room for all of us in this space. And the best way to get out there and have people start listening to your show is to actually start your show. I loved what Mona said when she talked about how you can literally start making an impact right now. If you just say yes, you push record, and you commit to getting started. And if you are someone who has yet to get started and you are ready, I have created something just for you. I've had a free podcast launch guide for a while, but I've given it a big makeover. There's still a PDF guide, but now there's updated private podcast episodes to go with this guide. And it's just updated with all of my current recommendations and things like that. So you can grab that for free at podcastingforeducators.com/launch guide. A huge thank you again to everyone who contributed to this episode. I am celebrating you. I hope you're celebrating yourself and other podcasters out there. Keep doing your thing, and I will see you here next week. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. To keep this conversation going, connect with me on Instagram at Podcasting for Educators. I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about podcasting. If you're looking for support in launching, managing, or growing your podcast, check out my online course, the Podcasting for Educators Prep School, at podcastingforeducators.com/prep school. I'll see you here next time.